There are souls who walk this earth carrying a weight that has no name, a knowing that predates language, a mission that whispers in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause before sleep, in the moment when silence becomes too loud to ignore. You feel it, don't you? That invisible thread pulling you towards something your mind cannot grasp, but your bones remember. Tonight, we descend into the archive where your soul keeps its most sacred secrets. She stands at the edge of every gathering, sensing the invisible currents that others cannot feel. He searches libraries for a book that was never written, holding knowledge that has no home in this world. They carry the peculiar loneliness of the mission bearer, exiled not from place but from ordinary meaning. This is the wound of the archetypal stranger, to remember what humanity has forgotten, to feel called by a voice that speaks in symbols, to carry light for a world that prefers familiar darkness. The portal of remembering. What if your deepest suffering is not a mistake but a map? What if the feeling of being different, displaced, eternally searching, is not pathology but prophecy? The Akashic records are not some mystical filing system in the sky. They are the living memory held in your cellular knowing, the archive of purpose written in your nervous system, waiting for the right silence to be read. This is not about finding your mission. This is about remembering what your soul never forgot. The ancient whisper that crosses time, when the soul remembers before the mind understands. Jung spoke of a collective unconscious, but what he touched was deeper still. There exists an archetypal memory that some carry like a birth scar, invisible but undeniable. You know this feeling, walking into a place you've never been and recognizing it completely, meeting someone and feeling the strange comfort of reunion rather than introduction. I once knew a woman who at age 7 began drawing maps of cities that didn't exist, detailed streets, buildings with specific windows, gardens she could smell in her dreams. Decades later, traveling through Prague, she found herself on a street identical to her childhood drawings. She sat on a bench she had sketched 1,000 times and wept, not from joy, but from the overwhelming relief of being found by her own memory. This is the neuroscience of archetypal knowing. When the hippocampus recognizes patterns that bypass conscious learning, when mirror neurons fire for experiences that belong to no personal history, when the body carries knowing that predates this lifetime's education. Some children are born already homesick for a place they've never seen. Some adults feel perpetually unprepared for a conversation they know they're supposed to have. This is not delusion. This is the soul's impatience with linear time. The Akashic whisper comes through the body first. A sudden stillness when you hear a certain name. A physical knowing when you encounter your work, your people, your sacred wound. The mind scrambles to make sense, but the cells simply recognize. Can you feel it now? That slight shift in your breathing when truth approaches. The invisible exile of the mission bearer. When the outer world does not recognize your soul's language, there is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with carrying invisible purpose. Clarissa Pinkola Estes calls it the exile of the wild woman. Knowing a language the domesticated world has forgotten. You speak in symbols while others trade in surfaces. You feel depth while others float. He was a successful lawyer who would wake at 3 a.m. with an inexplicable urge to sing. Not performance, not pleasure, but as if something ancient needed to move through his voice. His colleagues saw competence. His soul felt suffocated by fluorescent lights and billable hours. The archetypal conflict between who you are becoming and who you have always been. This exile is part of the initiation. James Hillman wrote about the necessity of descent, how the soul must sometimes feel completely lost before it can remember its way home. The mission bearer often experiences what I call purposeful displacement, a divine restlessness that keeps them moving until they find their sacred work. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman's research on social pain reveals something profound. The brain experiences spiritual exile with the same intensity as physical injury. When you feel misunderstood at the soul level, your anterior cingulate cortex lights up as if you were being physically wounded. This is not metaphor. This is the body's wisdom protecting what it knows to be essential. The isolation serves a deeper purpose. In the space between worlds, between ordinary meaning and archetypal knowing, the soul can finally hear itself clearly, like a radio that must move away from the city's electromagnetic interference to catch the distant station it's seeking. The oracle of solitude. Sometimes the mission reveals itself not in grand visions, but in the quality of your aloneness. Notice what calls to you when no one is watching. Notice what you create when you think no one will understand. Notice how your body relaxes when you stop trying to fit your expansive soul into too small explanations. The exile is temporary, the remembering is eternal. Akashic records as a symbolic mirror. What the invisible records reveal about the self you forgot. Forget the mystical interpretations for a moment. The Akashic records are the living archive of human meaning-making, stored not in some ethereal library, but in the patterns that connect all seeking souls. Carl Jung intuited this when he described synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences that seem to arise when we align with our deepest purpose. She was a financial analyst who began noticing numbers everywhere, not just data, but sacred geometry in grocery receipts, Fibonacci sequences in flight patterns, mathematical poetry in her daughter's laughter. Her logical mind dismissed it as pattern-seeking bias. Her soul knew better. Within 2 years, she had left corporate life to become a sacred mathematics teacher, helping others see the divine architecture hidden in ordinary calculations. This is how the Akasha speaks, through the sudden coherence of previously scattered fragments. When you approach your authentic mission, life begins organizing itself around you with uncanny precision. The right books appear, the necessary conversations happen, resources materialize from unexpected sources. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's research on morphic resonance suggests something radical. Information can be transmitted across time and space through what he calls morphic fields, invisible patterns that connect similar forms and behaviors. When you tune into your soul's frequency, you begin resonating with the field of your purpose, attracting the people, opportunities, and challenges needed for your sacred work. The neuroscience of symbolic perception. Recent discoveries in neuroscience reveal how the brain processes symbolic information. The right hemisphere, particularly the temporal parietal junction, specializes in pattern recognition and meaning-making that transcends literal interpretation. When you have those moments of knowing without knowing why, this region is accessing information through networks that bypass conscious analysis. Indigenous wisdom keepers have always understood this. They speak of receiving guidance through dreams, visions, and bodily knowing because they recognize these as valid forms of information processing. The mission bearer often possesses what I call enhanced symbolic perception, the ability to read meaning in events, encounters, and inner experiences that others dismiss as coincidence. But here's the crucial distinction. The soul's memory is different from ego projection. When the Akasha speaks, it feels like recognition rather than acquisition, like remembering rather than learning, like coming home rather than going somewhere new. Do you recognize this? The difference between wanting something and being called by something. Symbolic trauma and the mission block, the wound that holds the map. When trauma is a disguised portal, here lies one of the soul's most profound mysteries. Often, our deepest wounds contain the seeds of our most authentic purpose. Not because suffering is noble, but because the places where we break open are often the places where light was meant to enter and be transmitted to others. Joseph Campbell wrote about the wounded healer archetype, how those who have descended into their own darkness often return with medicine for others' journeys. But trauma can also become the very thing that silences the mission, creating what I call protective sabotage, the unconscious patterns that keep us from our purpose to keep us from further pain. She survived childhood abuse by becoming hyper-vigilant, reading micro-expressions and emotional undercurrents with supernatural accuracy. For decades, this skill felt like a curse, always sensing others' pain, never able to simply be present without scanning for danger. Then she discovered her gift. She could see through people's masks to their authentic selves, helping them reclaim parts of themselves they had abandoned. Her trauma had carved out the very sensitivity that became her greatest offering. The neurobiology of mission-silencing trauma researcher Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work reveals how unprocessed trauma literally changes brain structure. The amygdala becomes hyperactive, the prefrontal cortex goes offline, and the entire system prioritizes survival over growth. But here's what's rarely discussed. Trauma can also silence what I call archetypal knowing, the soul's ability to sense its deeper purpose. When we're stuck in survival mode, the nervous system cannot access the subtle frequencies through which the soul communicates. The mission feels like a luxury we can't afford, a dream too dangerous to entertain. The wounded parts of us whisper, "Stay small, stay safe, don't risk being seen." Cortisol, the stress hormone, doesn't just affect memory formation, it affects what we remember about ourselves. Chronic elevation can literally erase our sense of larger purpose, making us feel like biological machines rather than souls with sacred work to do. The ritual of listening to the wound. But what if the wound itself holds the key? Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Not because pain is sacred, but because breaking open can reveal what was always trying to emerge. I invite you to consider, what if your deepest trauma carved out the exact space needed for your unique medicine? What if the ways you learned to survive are directly connected to the ways you're meant to serve? This requires exquisite gentleness, not spiritual bypassing, not pretending trauma is a gift, but archetypal listening, asking what the wound might be protecting, what it might be pointing toward, what it might be preparing you to understand in others. The mission often lives in the intersection between your greatest wound and your deepest love, where your pain meets your passion, where your healing meets the world's need. Spiritual shadow and the illusion of the savior mission, when the desire to fulfill the mission hides the escape from one's own pain. Here we encounter one of the soul's most seductive illusions, the belief that our mission is to save others from the very pain we refuse to face in ourselves. This is spiritual shadow at its most sophisticated, the ego wearing robes of service while avoiding the altar of self-examination. Marion Woodman spent her life working with what she called the savior complex, the unconscious pattern of seeking worth through rescuing others. She observed how many healers, teachers, and spiritual guides were actually running from their own inner children, their own unmet needs, their own primal wounds. He became a renowned meditation teacher, guiding thousands toward inner peace while privately battling anxiety that kept him awake until dawn. His mission felt authentic. The techniques worked. People experienced profound transformation under his guidance. But the teaching had become a sophisticated form of spiritual bypassing, allowing him to focus on others' liberation while avoiding his own vulnerability. This is not about judgment. This is about archetypal precision. The soul calls us to serve from wholeness, not from emptiness trying to fill itself through service. The difference is subtle but crucial. Authentic mission flows from overflow, not from deficiency seeking completion. The neuroscience of spiritual performance. Recent research on altruistic behavior reveals something fascinating. When we help others primarily to feel better about ourselves, different neural networks activate than when we serve from genuine care. The former activates reward circuits associated with addiction and seeking. We become dependent on being needed. The latter activates circuits associated with love and connection. We become available to be used. Dr. Kristin Neff's work on self-compassion shows how many helpers have incredibly harsh inner critics. They can offer others unlimited kindness while speaking to themselves with cruelty. This internal split creates what I call leaky service. We pour ourselves out for others while secretly depleting our own well. The spiritual shadow whispers, "Your pain doesn't matter. Others have it worse." Your mission is to transcend your humanity, not embrace it. But true archetypal service requires what Hillman called being faithful to your symptom, honoring your own psychological reality as sacred information rather than obstacle to overcome. The wounded redeemer archetype. Carl Jung identified the wounded healer as one of the most powerful archetypes in human consciousness, but he also warned of its shadow, the healer who wounds others with their unhealed wounds, the teacher who projects their unlived life onto students, the spiritual guide who leads others into the wilderness of their own confusion. The antidote is radical self-honesty. What are you trying to heal in the world that remains unhealed in yourself? What are you trying to give others that you've never learned to receive? What mission are you claiming that might be protecting you from facing your own initiation? This is not about perfection before service. This is about consciousness during service, about serving from your questions rather than your answers, about letting your mission refine you rather than using it to avoid refinement. Can you feel the difference between wanting to heal the world and being available to be healed through service? Applied neurospirituality and listening to purpose. The body as oracle, when the soul speaks through physiology. Your nervous system is the most sophisticated spiritual technology you possess. Every cell contains what neuroscientist Dr. Candice Pert called molecules of emotion, neuropeptides that respond not just to thoughts and feelings, but to what she termed the wisdom of the body. When you approach your authentic purpose, your physiology knows before your mind catches up. Ancient wisdom keepers spoke of the serpent road, the invisible pathway that connects heart, throat, and belly in one continuous stream of knowing. Modern healers have rediscovered this as the vagus nerve, but the mystery remains unchanged. When you encounter your true calling, something golden moves through this inner highway. Your breath becomes a prayer. Your heartbeat becomes a drum calling you home. Your entire being remembers the frequency of recognition. She was a corporate consultant who suffered chronic migraines, inexplicable fatigue, and what doctors called functional neurological symptoms. Nothing wrong, everything painful. Then she attended a poetry reading. As the words washed over her, something extraordinary happened. Her headache dissolved mid-sentence. Her breathing opened. Her hands stopped trembling for the first time in months. Within 6 months, she had left consulting to become a spoken word artist, and her mysterious symptoms disappeared completely. This is not psychosomatic healing. This is what I call archetypal alignment. When you move toward your authentic purpose, your nervous system recognizes home and begins functioning optimally. When you move away from it, even in pursuit of success, your body protests with symptoms that have no clear medical cause. Dopamine and the neurochemistry of calling. There is a chemistry of calling that flows beneath conscious awareness. Indigenous healers called it the honey of purpose, the sweet nectar that flows when you align with your soul's original instructions. This honey doesn't just create pleasure, it creates the kind of focused devotion that makes you forget hunger, forget time, forget everything except the work your hands were born to do. Notice what makes this honey flow in your own system. What activities leave you tired in body but luminous in spirit? This is your nervous system recognizing its home frequency. Indigenous wisdom keepers have always known this. They speak of following your original instructions, the purpose encoded in your spiritual DNA. Modern neuroscience is beginning to understand what they never forgot. The body is constantly communicating with you about alignment and authenticity. Embodied listening practices. The Akashic records are not accessed through the mind, but through embodied awareness. Here are subtle practices for developing your capacity to receive guidance through your nervous system. The pause practice. Before making any decision, pause and notice what happens in your body. Does your chest open or contract? Does your breathing deepen or become shallow? Does energy move toward expansion or withdrawal? The recognition response. When you encounter something connected to your purpose, a book, a person, an opportunity, notice the physical sensation of recognition. It often feels like a gentle yes in the solar plexus, a warmth in the heart, or a tingling awareness in the hands. The truth, tremor. Your body has an unmistakable response to deep truth. Many people experience a subtle shaking, a fullness in the throat, or tears that come from somewhere deeper than emotion. This is the nervous system recognizing archetypal accuracy. Your mission is not something you figure out. It's something you remember through increasingly refined sensitivity to your own inner oracle. Silence as the language of the Akasha. Not everything essential can be translated into words. In our word-saturated world, we have forgotten the profound intelligence of silence. The Akasha speaks in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the moment of recognition that has no language. Some of the soul's most important communications cannot be translated into concepts. They can only be felt, embodied, lived. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century mystic and composer, described receiving her visions not as words or images, but as the living light, a knowing that entered through silence and expressed itself through her entire being. She understood what modern neuroscience is beginning to discover. Consciousness communicates through multiple channels simultaneously, most of which operate below the threshold of verbal awareness. He was a successful architect who began waking each morning with an inexplicable urge to sit in silence. Not meditation, not prayer, just pure listening. For months, nothing seemed to happen. Then slowly, he began sensing the emotional architecture of spaces. Walking into buildings, he could feel where love had lived, where trauma was stored in the walls, where the human soul felt welcomed or rejected. This became his sacred work, designing spaces that held healing frequency, structures that supported the invisible needs of the human spirit. The neurological basis of silent knowing seekers throughout time have discovered that when the mind stops its constant commentary, other forms of intelligence begin to emerge. In Tibet, they call this the space between thoughts. In Brazil, shamans speak of the quiet that teaches. Neuroscientists have mapped these moments of open awareness, finding that the brain activates ancient networks of connection and insight, the same patterns that light up during profound recognition, moral clarity, and what mystics have always called direct knowing. The default mode network may be the neurological substrate through which we access what Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared field of human wisdom and archetypal knowing. The paradox of receptive attention. The Akashic frequency requires what I call receptive attention, the ability to listen without agenda, to remain open without grasping, to receive without interpreting. This is the opposite of how we're taught to engage with information in our culture. We're trained to analyze, categorize, utilize. But the soul's wisdom requires what Keats called negative capability, the capacity to remain in uncertainty and doubt without irritably reaching after fact and reason. Sufi poetry speaks of this as polishing the mirror of the heart. When we stop projecting our expectations onto the silence, it begins reflecting back the wisdom we most need. When we stop demanding that guidance come in forms we recognize, it begins arriving in the shapes our souls are prepared to receive. The space between words. Pay attention to the pauses in this very moment, the micro-silences between sentences, the slight gap between inhale and exhale, the space between one thought ending and another beginning. In these seemingly empty moments, something profound is always happening. The nervous system is integrating. The unconscious is processing. The soul is comparing this new information with its deepest knowing. Sacred texts from every tradition acknowledge this. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the usefulness of emptiness, how the space within a cup makes it capable of holding. Jewish mysticism describes the Tzimtzum, the divine contraction that creates space for existence. Christian contemplatives write about the dark night of the soul, the fertile void where transformation occurs. Your mission may not come as a burning bush or a voice from the sky. It may come as a gradual recognition, a growing sensitivity, an increasing capacity to receive the guidance that has always been available in the silence between your thoughts. Can you hear it now? The intelligence that speaks in the spaces between these words? Ritual integration of the forgotten mission. How to turn symbolic memories into concrete soul gestures. Knowing your mission is not enough. The soul requires what James Hillman called active imagination, the conscious participation in the archetypal realm through ritual, symbol, and sacred action. Your purpose must be lived through your hands, embodied in your daily rhythms, integrated into the texture of ordinary life. Jung understood this when he spent years carving stone, building with his hands, engaging with matter as a way of dialoguing with the unconscious. He wasn't escaping psychology. He was practicing psychology at its deepest level, allowing the soul to express itself through form and gesture. She had spent years feeling called to something she couldn't name. Then she began a simple practice. Each morning before dawn, she would light a candle and write one page without stopping, letting whatever wanted to emerge flow through her pen. The pages were often nonsensical, but the ritual created a bridge between her conscious mind and something deeper. 6 months later, she realized she had been receiving the outline for a novel that would change her life and touch thousands of readers. Small rituals of return to meaning. The mission doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic life changes. Sometimes it begins with tiny acts of devotion to what feels most essential. Creating small daily practices that honor your soul's language, even when you don't fully understand what it's trying to communicate. Morning pages. Write 3 pages by hand each morning, letting consciousness flow unedited onto paper. This practice, developed by Julia Cameron, creates a direct line of communication with the unconscious and often reveals patterns, themes, and callings that the rational mind would never discover. Evening inventory. Before sleep, ask your body, what wanted to be expressed today that couldn't find its way? Notice what arises without judgment. This practice helps you track the difference between who you were and who you're becoming. Sacred pausing. Throughout the day, take micro moments of silence, not to achieve anything, but to create space for the soul to speak. These pauses often become portals through which guidance enters. Active imagination as bridge building. Carl Jung's technique of active imagination involves dialoguing with the figures, symbols, and archetypes that appear in dreams, fantasies, and creative expression. This is not passive visualization, it's conscious participation in the soul's symbolic reality. If you dream of a woman in white who speaks in a language you don't understand, you dialogue with her. If you find yourself repeatedly drawn to images of keys, you explore what doors might be waiting to be opened. If certain words or phrases keep appearing in your awareness, you ask them what they want to tell you. One man kept dreaming of an ancient library with books written in symbols instead of words. Instead of trying to interpret the dream, he began painting the symbols he remembered. The act of painting became a form of prayer, a way of receiving the wisdom the symbols contained. Eventually, he realized his calling was to help others access their own symbolic wisdom through art therapy. The integration principle. Your mission is not separate from your life. It is the sacred thread that runs through all aspects of your existence. Integration means allowing your purpose to inform your relationships, your work, your creative expression, your way of being in the world. This might mean having conversations differently, creating beauty differently, responding to conflict differently, choosing how to spend your time and energy based on archetypal alignment rather than external expectations. Sometimes fulfilling your mission is as simple as bringing full presence to whatever you're already doing, but with consciousness of the larger pattern you're serving. For those who feel but do not yet remember, the mission is an echo, not a destination. We have journeyed together into the sacred archive where your soul keeps its most essential memories. If you have come this far, you are not someone who stumbled upon this message by accident. You are someone whose soul is ready to remember what it has always known. Your mission is not a task to be completed, but a frequency to be embodied. Not a destination to reach, but an essence to express. Not something you must discover outside yourself, but something you must finally allow to emerge from within. The Sufi poet Hafez wrote, "I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being." This is what the Akashic records reveal, not information about what you should do, but recognition of what you have always been. Some of you carry the medicine of deep listening in a world that has forgotten how to hear. Some of you hold the frequency of compassion for those trapped in their own suffering. Some of you are here to create beauty that reminds others of their divine nature. Some of you serve by asking the questions no one else dares to ask. The recognition. Your mission has been calling to you through every book that made you weep, every conversation that changed you, every moment when you felt most authentically yourself. It has been speaking through your wounds, your longings, your inexplicable attractions and aversions. It has been present in every time you felt like a stranger in your own life, and every time you felt completely at home in your own skin. The mission is not something you must earn through spiritual achievement or psychological perfection. It is not dependent on your readiness or your worthiness. It is the echo of your soul's original vow, the promise you made before you took this form, the love that called you into existence. The sacred assignment. Tonight before you sleep, place your hand on your heart and ask, what wants to be born through me? Don't wait for an answer in words. Wait for recognition in your body. Wait for the deep yes that rises from somewhere older than thought. Tomorrow, notice what draws your attention with unusual magnetic power. Notice what makes you linger. Notice what makes you feel suddenly, inexplicably alive. These are not random attractions. They are breadcrumbs leading you back to your archetypal purpose. Begin honoring what wants to emerge, even if it makes no logical sense. Especially if it makes no logical sense. The soul speaks in symbols, not strategies. It reveals itself through attraction, not analysis. The eternal return. You are not lost. You have never been lost. You're in the process of remembering who you have always been, beneath the identities you've worn, beneath the stories you've told yourself, beneath the fears that have kept you small. Your mission is not waiting for you in some distant future. It is alive in this moment, in your willingness to listen more deeply, to feel more fully, to trust the intelligence that moves through your longing and your love. The Akashic records are not ancient history. They are the living memory of what is possible when a soul remembers its purpose and has the courage to live it. For those who have felt the calling, but not yet the clarity, For those who know they carry something precious but cannot name it. For those who have always sensed they came here for something specific and sacred. The mission is not what you must do. The mission is what you already are, finally ready to be lived through you. The archive is open. The memory is stirring. The soul is ready to speak. Listen. If this ancient memory has stirred something that sleeps in your bones, if recognition has whispered through your silence, remain with us in this circle of remembrance. Let these transmissions from the soul's archive continue to find you in the spaces between your ordinary days. Send this echo to those whose hearts carry the same inexplicable weight, those who have always felt they came bearing invisible gifts. They will recognize the frequency. They have been waiting for this reunion with what they have always known but could never name. The soul that brought you here tonight knows what it came to remember. The fact that these words found their way to your listening is the first confirmation of what your deepest self has always whispered. What begins now is not work, but recognition. Not effort, but sacred attention to what has been calling you home through every longing, every restless night, every moment when you felt most yourself. The mission you've been seeking has been seeking you.